While Queen Elizabeth cultivated relations with the wider Islamic world and with the Ottomans in particular, she also nurtured relationships right here in England. In this session, we're going to talk a little bit about an early Muslim community in London on the Strand. So we spoke about previously Queen Elizabeth's excommunication by the Catholic Church, and that created a rupture with Catholic Europe. So the Queen had to find relations with other empires outside of Europe, with other countries. These were trade relations, military relations, and diplomatic relations. So she formed a partnership with the Ottomans, but another Islamic empire with which she formed a partnership was the Kingdom of Morocco. Now that relationship was particularly nurtured by the fact that both England and Morocco had a mutual enmity with Spain. For Queen Elizabeth, it was because Spain was Catholic, and for the Moroccans, it was because the 1492 loss of Muslim Spain was a deep wound within the Islamic world, but particularly in Morocco, because that was where most Muslims gathered as refugees. So the King of Morocco, Ahmed al-Mansour, sought to find a partnership with Queen Elizabeth, a military partnership, in order to effect a reconquest of Muslim Spain. And in 1600, he sent along an embassy to Queen Elizabeth's court. Now this embassy was a 16-man embassy, and it was led by an ambassador called Abdul Wahid ibn Mas'ud ibn Muhammad al-Nouri. And it arrived aboard an English ship on August of 1600. Now this was a fascinating moment in England's history, the first Muslim community to take up residence in the Strand. And al-Nouri came with the 16-man entourage, and they stayed for 6 months. They took up residence in a home of a tradesman on the Strand near the Royal Exchange, and the English left them to manage their own matters. So that means that they managed their own food, they managed their own affairs, and they were left and respected in that way. 5 days after they arrived, they appeared at court, and there they were very respectfully received and respectfully engaged in discussions. And these discussions were conducted in Spanish. And we can have a look at some of the discussions from a memo from that period. So al-Nouri says of his king, "He will take the war to Spain, since our land is closer. Moreover, we have a large cavalry and infantry, and all manner of munitions, as well as gunpowder and everything else needed to wage war, and plenty of wheat and other provisions. We also have forests with trees for shipbuilding, and iron to fit them, pursuant of the art of war. And should Her Serene Majesty capture any strongholds or cities in Spain that are close to us and which she wishes to supply with soldiers, munitions or money, the Emperor his master shall see to all of this, because the Emperor will accede with great love to whatever Her Serene Majesty should ask of him, bound by the ancient friendship between them." So al-Nouri's embassy engaged in deep military diplomatic negotiations. But it wasn't only diplomacy with which this early Muslim community engaged. They also participated in celebrations such as the Accession Day tilts, and most interestingly, al-Nouri sat for a portrait in England. Now this is the first portrait of a Muslim taken from life in England, and we have it to this day. You can see from this portrait that al-Nouri is a man of stature. His gaze is steady and his expression is confident. He bears his Moroccan robes with pride, he wears his turban and his thobe, he has an engraved beautiful sword by his side. So this was a man who took pride in his traditions and took pride in his culture and wore it with pride during his embassy. So what do we learn from this fascinating early community in Britain? Well, for one thing, we learn the value of nurturing community. This was a community that took up residence in the Strand, 16 men together, and they were left to manage their own affairs, including their halal food, including wearing their traditional robes. We also learned the value of mutual respect. This was a community that was engaged in diplomatic negotiations at Queen Elizabeth's court. They engaged with a great deal of respect, and they were also respected by the court. They were given the space to manage their own affairs, to observe their own traditions and wear their own attire. But one of the most interesting things about this early community is that this was an African community. This is a hugely diverse community that came to Britain. We know that the Muslim community in Britain is hugely diverse, but we don't know as often about the early communities that come from Africa. From the portrait of al-Nouri, we can see that his complexion is quite pale, But what we know of North Africa is that it's hugely diverse. And what we know of the Islamic world in that period as well is that it's hugely diverse. So no doubt this 16-man embassy had people of all backgrounds, of all appearances. And this is a truly empowering aspect of this early community.